first arrived in India, I went to the Himalayas, and I took on the life of a sadhu, wearing sadhu robes. I had a little begging pot, and I was traveling through the jungles and the mountains of the Himalayas, and meeting many great rishis, yogis, sages, living at their ashrams, learning from them. I was also living sometimes in caves with yogis in the jungles. Sometimes I was living in caves in seclusion myself, just practicing various meditations. I lived in Buddhist monasteries, studying Buddhism under Rinpoches and Lamas. And in this way I was traveling around India, looking for God realization. Each place, everyone wanted to initiate me, because to have a foreign disciple was very prestigious for yogis, gurus, lamas, rinpoches, and all of these other spiritual personalities. But I had felt in my heart that until I find a guru who I am convinced I will never leave for my whole life, I cannot accept initiation. So I was learning, and I was very favorable wherever I found, and traveling. And at one point I came to Bombay. I went there in order to try to get a renewal of my visa. So one day I was walking down the street in Bombay, and I saw a big sign, and it said Hare Krishna Festival. And under it said at Cross Maidan. So I asked someone, where is this Cross Maidan? And they told me where. So I went, and there was big pandal, and many devotees. And they told me that their Guru Maharaj was going to be speaking that night. So I stayed there and talked with devotees. I was reading Prabhupada's books during the day. And then Srila Prabhupada and all the devotees went on the stage. And there was thousands and thousands of people. There must have been 10,000, 15,000 people, maybe more. And I was a very insignificant sadhu. I had matted hair, begging pot, river-stained clothes, and I was way in the back of this massive crowd. And the devotees were chanting on stage every kirtan, and Prabhupada was in the middle of the stage sitting on a vyasa-san. And one devotee, Guru Das, he came all the way through all the crowds, and he came to me, and he took me by the hand, and he said, Srila Prabhupada wants you to sit beside him. I said, how does Srila Prabhupada know me? And Guru Das didn't say anything. He just said, he wants you to sit beside him. So we went through all these thousands and thousands of people, and I came up on the stage, and Srila Prabhupada looked at me and he smiled, and went like this, please here. So I came and I sat just a few feet away from his vyasa-san. And there was a beautiful kirtan, and then Madhuvista Swami was leading the kirtan. And all the devotees had clean-shaved heads, beautiful, clean dhotis and saris. And I had these river-stained sadhu clothes with holes in them, and matted hair down practically to my waist. Sadhu, at least trying to be. And I was just thinking, why has he called me here? I'm not a good image for how he appears with all of his devotees. But he smiled upon me very graciously and encouraged me.
After the temple was purchased in Watseka, I was transferred from Laguna to Los Angeles. I was living on La Cienega Boulevard. My service was, the first service they gave me was working with Bhavananda to prepare Srila Prabhupada's quarters for him to live in them. So I was painting, hammering nails and sanding, and preparing his room. So I believe the first time he really may have noticed me was when he moved into his apartment, and the crew that had been there working, we were there to greet him. And I never forget that he sat down behind his desk and he pulled out a bag of cookies and he handed each of us a cookie. Ate the cookie, and they said, now you must go wash your hands and feet. You must always do this after eating. And shortly after that, there was an incident that I remember fondly. It was one Sunday. The Sunday feast was on La Cienega Boulevard. But after the feast, I came back to work, and at that time I was painting in the ceiling of the temple room. And I was working on a scaffold, and I thought I was the only one in the temple. I was singing Hare Krishna mantra quite loudly, and not paying too much attention to anything else, chanting and painting. I happened to glance down, and Srila Prabhupada was standing on the floor, surrounded by the temple president, Gargamuni and Kurandar, and Brahmananda was there. And I was stunned. I scampered down from this scaffold, and I offered my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada. I was kneeling on the floor with my hands folded in front of him, and he looked at me and he folded his hands and he said, "Thank you very much." Afterwards, the devotees told me that when they had brought Srila Prabhupada over from the temple, and they told me that when they drove up, they could hear me singing, and Srila Prabhupada had asked them to be quiet, and they listened to my chanting as they walked into the temple, and they'd been listening as I'd been painting, and they were watching down below. So Srila Prabhupada appreciated the loud chanting.
We wanted to start an incense business in Toronto, and Jagadish sent me down to L.A. to Jayatirtha to learn the incense business from him. And since I knew Prabhupada was going to be in Rath Yatra in San Francisco, just prior to that I asked if I could go a little early so I might be able to see him, because none of us had ever seen him. And so he said, all right. So I went to the Rath Yatra in San Francisco when they had the funeral home, and actually spent a whole day driving around with, who's that famous Rath Yatra devotee that died? Jayananda. We spent a whole day together driving around watching. We were collecting donations and things. So I got to hang out with him during Rath Yatra, for which he is the most famous, And finally the day came when Prabhupada was coming in. We all went to the airport, and there was hundreds of us. And we were waiting anxiously, and the plane was late. And we were in the waiting room just at the doors where the people come off the plane. And it was interesting because there was a kind of a divider there. So you couldn't actually see the people walking up the hallway. You could just see them all coming out from either side. And we waited, and I think the plane was 20 minutes late, so it just intensified our anxiety and anticipation. And, many of us hadn't seen Prabhupada, and I was just wondering, what's it going to be like when I finally see him, because I'd seen so many pictures. And the plane landed, and then everything built up. It became more intense, and we were chanting. And then all of a sudden, the first passengers started coming off, and of course they were shocked because they saw all these devotees there. It was like, oh my God, what's going on here? And the devotees that were closest to the divider were the ones that were going to see him first. And finally, after a certain number of people came off, you could just feel a wave as they saw Prabhupada coming, and they got excited, and it built up, and it kind of just like a wave through, and then Prabhupada came around the divider, and as soon as I saw him, tears poured from my eyes. I just flowed like a water faucet, and it was so unbelievable. It was so good. And then I just paid my obeisances, and I just cried. And I was just so happy. It was wonderful.
And then he gave his lecture. And after the lecture, he started to walk to the stairs going down from the stage. And as he walked by me, I went to touch his feet. Because traditionally, as I was taught, you're supposed to touch a holy man's feet and place the dust upon your head. So when I reached out to touch his feet, one of his very senior disciples chastised me. He yelled at me. He said, no one is allowed to touch Srila Prabhupada's feet. So being very embarrassed, I pulled my hand back. And Prabhupada looked at me, and he smiled. And then he gave me the first instruction he ever gave me in my life. He said, you can touch my feet. So I reached and touched his lotus feet and placed the dust on my hand. And then he smiled very mercifully and told me, you come and sit here every night.
In those days, he would come on Monday evenings to La Cienega Temple and give a lecture. We would be always waiting outside. All the devotees would line the sidewalks. When he drove up, we'd all bow down, and Srila Prabhupada would walk down the line of devotees. Sometimes he'd pat a devotee on the head, sometimes he wouldn't. And you were always trying to understand whether he was accepting your service or not. And it seems that if he patted you, you felt that I'm not worthy, he's just giving me some encouragement. And if he wouldn't, you felt the same thing. There was another incident. Once we moved into the new temple on Watseka Avenue. Srila Prabhupada was giving Sri Upanishad classes every day. One incident, which is pretty famous, is that he asked after the class one day, he asked, "Is everyone chanting 16 rounds?" I was pretty naive, and I raised my hand. I said, "Srila Prabhupada, I'm not chanting 16 rounds." Srila Prabhupada looked at me. "Oh, why? Why you're not chanting 16 rounds?" "Srila Prabhupada, I'm working 20 hours a day. The temple president doesn't give me sufficient time to chant." "Then sleep 2 hours. Chant 16 rounds." You could hear the shudder in the devotees' hearts. Later I found that pretty much no one was chanting 16 rounds because it was the philosophy of the leaders that work was more important than chanting. And of course, Srila Prabhupada strongly said, don't diminish your work for the chanting, diminish your sleep. So I took it seriously, and I would spend my late nights standing in the hot water closet trying to finish my rounds.
We had a temple president who was artificially austere, Dharmaraj, always making us eat little, just, to be austere. And we were always in anxiety, would always pig out at the feast. And like everyone else, we were addicted to halava. There was just something about halava that was irresistible. So we were going to Detroit, and we didn't eat very much that day, and he made this huge thing of halava, but he wouldn't let us eat any. So all the way down, all I was thinking about was halava. And it was right there, and I was trying to steal some, and eat it. And I was in total anxiety. I'm thinking, here I am going to see the spiritual master, a pure devotee, and I'm thinking of halava. So I was so ashamed of myself. But I was in anxiety. So finally we got there, and then they said, Prabhupada's going to stay in this devotee's parents' house. We need some volunteers to clean the house. Who wants to volunteer? And everybody's putting up their hand. And I thought, well, put up your hand, you stupid idiot. Don't be a sourpuss. So they picked me. Meanwhile, my service at the temple had been cleaning the bathroom. And I had a lot of realizations cleaning the bathroom. I just surrendered and I got into it, and I made it like a real, good service. And I just accepted it, that I was a toilet cleaner. So I would clean the bathroom very thoroughly, and I just became proud of being a toilet cleaner. And I thought about the Gita a lot. So I made a lot of spiritual advancement in the bathroom. And when I went to the house, they said, okay, we need somebody to clean the bathroom. I said, me. So I was in ecstasy cleaning the bathroom. I felt like I'd been trained for this. So when Prabhupada finally came, they had this huge plate of fruit and everything, and we sat down with Prabhupada, and he said, well, have some, and we were kind of picking at it. Like the Prabhupada said, never be shy in business or eating, prasadam. So we just ate. And I never forgot that. So I was never shy from that point on in business or prasadam.
I had known already so many of the residents of Vrindavan, and they told me that Swami Bhaktivedanta is living at Sharaf Bhavan, one very wealthy man's house, with his disciples. So I went there to meet Srila Prabhupada. And when I arrived, it was the early morning, and Srila Prabhupada was giving Srimad Bhagavatam class. And I remember he was chanting Jai Radha Madhava. And as he was chanting, I was appreciating like I had never appreciated anything in my whole life. I was thinking that the gravity, the intensity of the devotion in which he was chanting Krishna's names, I had never seen anywhere. I had met so many of the greatest yogis, the greatest gurus of the Himalayas, many great Christian saints, Muslim saints. For 6 months I was traveling through Vrindavan, meeting all of the Babajis, so many of his god brothers, so many of the very famous Vrajavasi saints. But I had never seen such a depth of love and compassion in Srila Prabhupada as he was chanting Radha Madhava. My heart completely transformed. And then he gave his lecture. And when he spoke, every question I ever had was answered in one lecture. He spoke in such a way that everything I had ever learned in every religion I felt was included within his message, plus something far more that was sublime. And it was at that time, sitting at his feet in Vrindavan, that in my heart I accepted this is my spiritual master, and I must surrender my life to him.
I distinctly remember my initiation, of course, because it was something you dream of and pray for and wait for innumerable lifetimes. But in particular, when Srila Prabhupada was there, he said, "Bill Prabhu, come forward." He said, "Your name is Bhakta Das." Handed me my beads. He said, "This name means that you are the servant of the devotees. The more you think of yourself as a servant, the more you will advance in spiritual life. The more you think you're becoming a master, the faster you will go to hell." So, in that one sentence, he pretty much summarized the essence of Krishna consciousness philosophy. And over the years, I meditate on it over and over and over again, and have attempted to serve the devotees whatever means I can, and I've found that it is, without any doubt, the mercy of the devotees that helps one to advance in spiritual life, much more than the mercy of Krishna. Our philosophy is that we get the mercy of Krishna is to get our Guru. The mercy of the Guru, or the mercy of the devotees, is to get Krishna. We oftentimes, of course, in the neophyte stage, Kanishta level of devotees, we worship the deity and we neglect the devotees. Or we give respect to the, quote, big devotees, swamis, gurus, but we neglect the ordinary devotees. And in this way, I know I'm guilty of every variety of offense, but I keep hearing these words of Srila Prabhupada again and again, echoing in my mind, become the servant of the devotees. And I finally concluded that the highest service is to serve the newest devotee, the youngest devotee, because he's taken the bold step to try to leave the material world. And if you help him, then you're really helping the Krishna consciousness movement. People that are already mature in devotional service, of course, don't need so much help.
Normally, probably at about 90% of the time, Prabhupada would give a name that had the first letter of your Western name. So I thought, being Ron, my name would be Ram or something like that. But instead, Prabhupada gave me the name Uttama Shloka. And he said to me, "Your name is Uttama Shloka, Krishna who is praised with transcendental songs." I had been a musician, and I had enjoyed some local notoriety, and wanted in the beginning to use my musical abilities to serve Krishna, writing songs and whatnot. And I always wanted to do something like that. And when Prabhupada gave me that name and said, "Krishna who is praised with transcendental songs," I just was in ecstasy. I thought it was wonderful, So, I thought that was very special. And then again, I got Gayatri at the same time, so Prabhupada spoke it into my ear personally. So that was also auspicious.
And then Srila Prabhupada every day would take us on parikrama to many of the holy places. He took us to Govardhan and Badarsana and Nandagaon. He took us to the various places in Vrindavan, Radha Damodar Temple, Radha Govindaji Temple. And I remember especially one day he took us to Mahavan, Gokul, and he took us to Brahmandagat. And Brahmandagat is the place where Krishna was accused of eating dirt. And then he opened his mouth and Mother Yashoda saw the universe. I remember Srila Prabhupada so animately telling that story right at the place. He was telling the stories wherever he would take us. And then he told us to take bath in the Jamuna. So all the devotees were inviting Prabhupada to also take bath in Jamuna. But Srila Prabhupada said, "Today I am very sick and I cannot take bath, but you all go and enjoy a nice bath in Jamuna." So all the devotees were in Jamuna and he was in the steps, quite high over the river. And he was just watching all the devotees enjoying the wonderful ambrosial waters of Jamuna. And he was just smiling, looking at us. And he became so ecstatic just to see all the devotees bathing that he very quickly got up and took off his clothes and put on gamsha and came down to take bath with us in Jamuna. And devotees were very ecstatic, very happy. Everyone was gathered around him, and devotees were even bathing him like an abhishek with Jamuna water. And Srila Prabhupada was just very happy to be bathing in the Jamuna along with his disciples in the holy land of Vrindavan.
Once I was in SanDiego, and I became temple president, and I started having to write to him once a month and give each temple president was supposed to write every month and give Srila Prabhupada a report on the activities of the particular center. I started writing my first letter, I believe, in January of 1971. I was so nervous, I agonized over every word, every comma, wanting to try and make it perfect. It probably took me weeks to write the letter. And Srila Prabhupada wrote back, and he said, "It appears Krishna has his blessings on you. Now you just make sure that all of our principles are followed, and then there will never be any scarcity." So I found that to be invaluable instruction, and I still try to live by that we should have faith that Krishna will maintain and protect his devotees if we are obedient to our spiritual master.
I had found a building in Toronto, a big church on Avenue Road, which is a very, very good location, and a huge building, wonderful building, and perfect. And this Christian group was moving out to a new place, and it was for sale for $500,000. And all the realtors kept telling us about this place, so there was all this attention focused on it, and it was the best place we had found in years of looking. So I went to Prabhupada, and I told him, about the building, and they introduced Prabhupada. This is the temple president from Toronto, Uddhava Shloka. Prabhupada, we found this building. It's amazing. It's this huge church. The temple room is like 40 feet high ceilings. There's space for brahmachari quarters. I described everything to him, and he said, "Sounds great. How much do they want?" And I said, "Well, they want $500,000." And we had never paid that much for a building. And he said, "That's a lot of money. What's the use of buying anxiety? Then all you're thinking about is collecting money. We don't need to purchase anxiety. That's not our business. Our business is, to remember Krishna, and that's all." So it's a good location. I said, "Oh yes, Prabhupada. Good condition. Oh, beautiful, Prabhupada. It's on this main road. Everybody drives." But what's the use of purchasing anxiety? It's, we don't need that. It's not. We don't want to purchase anxiety. I said, "Yeah, okay." Big temple room? Yes, Prabhupada. Nice temple room. Wonderful. Maybe you could come to Toronto and see it. Maybe we'll come, Okay. Now, I can't remember if he asked to see me again. I don't think he asked to see me again. Maybe once more, but I can't remember. So anyway, he finally came to Toronto about 3 weeks later, after Philadelphia. He wasn't going to come, then he was, then he wasn't. Meantime, I took over Chicago, but because I was still in Toronto, I got to host him with Vishwakarma. So we picked him up at the airport and drove home in the car, and he said, "Can we go see the building?" And I said, "Sure." We arranged to go see it, and they had already moved out. So we drove him over to the building, and we took him on a tour, and there was one of the Christian guys left there. And we're looking around, and I'm telling him, "Here's the temple room, and here's the prasadam room, and this, and we'll do this here and that there, and I got it all worked out, and yada, yada, yada." And then we're walking by this table, and they got some leftover books, and one of them says, "What does God look like?" Prabhupada looks at it, and he picks it up, and he said, "Ask him if we can buy this." I said, "Can we buy this book?" He said, "You can have it." I said, "Okay." So we get in the car, and Prabhupada says, "Read something to me. Read the book." So I started reading the book, and it was just going nowhere. He said, "They don't know what God looks like. It's just a bluff." And then, so we get back to the house, and it's getting later on in the day, and Prabhupada's thinking about it, and so we're all excited from the day, and it's about 10 o'clock at night, and the phone call comes. "Prabhupada wants to see you. Come over to the apartment right away." So I go over to the apartment, and he said, "Do you have all the plans, the blueprints, how you're going to lay it out and everything?" "Yes." "Oh, yes, Prabhupada, I have everything." He goes, "I think this would be an ideal temple." I said, "Yes, Prabhupada, it would be, wonderful." And then he says, "How much do they want?" I said, $500,000. He goes, "Well, why don't we go there, and you ask if they'll take $300,000. How much do you have?" I said, "Well, we have about $40,000. He he said, can you get another 60? I said, well, we can try. Then he said, Brahmananda, how much do we have in the BBT? He said, well, we have 200 and something. He goes, give them 200,000. He goes, Prabhupada, we've never given that much at all to anybody. He goes, that's okay, give it to them. And see if they'll take 300,000 cash. And tell them we'll worship Lord Jesus next to Lord Krishna on the altar. So we'll preserve the Christian element, so to speak. And he said, so do you think they'll do that? I said, well, we can only try. And I said, but, he said, can you handle the payments on 300,000? I said, well, Prabhupada, that's an awful lot of money. I said, we don't want to purchase anxiety. He goes, no, there must be anxiety. Otherwise, we'll simply be sitting around eating prasadam and getting fat. There must be anxiety. He just slammed his fist on the table. I was like, okay. Completely reversed what he said. Well, we don't want to purchase anxiety. There must be anxiety. Everybody was shocked. Everybody was shocked.
After the parikrama, in the morning every day, devotees would take prasad, and then Srila Prabhupada would have darshan in his room and meet his old friends from Vrindavan, his godbrothers, and so many others. And I used to just sit there all afternoon with him and just watch him talking with his old Brajavasi friends. And there was a rule that devotees were not supposed to be there, because in the afternoon the devotees were supposed to do seva, doing Harinam, Sankirtan, and other services. So I would sit there, and one day the regional manager of ISKCON for India at the time, he saw me sitting there with Srila Prabhupada, and at that time it was just Prabhupada and myself in the room, and he said to me that no devotees are allowed to sit with Prabhupada during his darshan time. And I looked at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada looked at me, and then I said to this devotee, I said, but I'm not a devotee. And I pointed to my matted hair. And then he looked at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada smiled, and then he left, and I got to stay with Prabhupada. And I remember it was so beautiful seeing Prabhupada meet his old friends, especially Krishnadas Babaji. That was a beautiful sight. Krishnadas Babaji came to see Prabhupada. I remember actually, I met him on the street and I told him that Prabhupada was here. So he said, take me. So I brought him. And while I was trying to bring him up the stairs to Prabhupada's room, one sannyasi disciple told him he wasn't allowed to come. He was actually ready to physically throw him out. I said, please ask Prabhupada if he wants to see him. And he went up and asked, and then he said, yes, he wants to see you. So he came into the room, and when Srila Prabhupada met him, Prabhupada was talking to a whole group of about 15 people. When Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj came into the room, Prabhupada's eyes just became filled with tears, and Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj's eyes became full of tears. And Prabhupada stood up, and Babaji Maharaj called out, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And Prabhupada practically ran to him and embraced him. And as they were embracing, they were just so affectionate. I had never seen in my entire life such affectionate and love between two people as Prabhupada was embracing his godbrother. And then Prabhupada took him with his arms around him to the seat where he would sit behind a little table. And they were both sitting together on this seat, and they had their arms around each other, and they were talking in Bengali. And as they were talking, I couldn't understand, but Prabhupada was laughing so hard. Krishnadas Babaji kept saying these things, and Prabhupada was just laughing and laughing and laughing. And every now and then they would slap each other on the legs. They were practically sitting on top of each other. And there was tears in their eyes. They were just so happy to be together, discussing transcendental subject matters. And it was amazing because all these people in the room, Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada, were completely oblivious to everyone. They were just in their own world. hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord together.
I asked him, should I get married? Because I was a brahmachari, and within my mind I was determined I'm going to remain a brahmachari in this life. I never had a girlfriend before I joined the movement. I felt that Krishna had protected me, and I felt that I could continue. And then some of our senior men in Los Angeles started telling me that I should marry various girls. And this just totally destroyed my mental equilibrium. I started thinking about getting married, and I asked him, and he said, as far as your getting married is concerned, it is better if you can remain a brahmachari. But he didn't say no or yes. It wasn't specific. And eventually, then there was some talk, after this visit to SanDiego in 1972, there was some talk that I should take sannyas. And then I had to really search in my heart where I'm at, and I concluded that every time a pretty girl walks in the temple, my mind would be attracted to her, or I'd think of her. And I said, I don't want to take sannyas under this condition. When I take sannyas, I want to be free of this. So I went and got married instead. I've come to, over the years, come to appreciate very much the mercy of the Grihastha ashram. Krishna is so kind to allow us that. I think those poor Mayavadis must take sannyas, even though their hearts are full of so many desires.
This particular incident took place in Toronto, and I believe it was 1976. And we were in the new temple there. I was president of Chicago, but I had been president of Toronto. Vishwakarma was then the president. So we were up there, because it was only the second time that Prabhupada had come there. And it was a morning walk, and I don't know why, but I didn't go on that morning walk. But after it was over, Vishwakarma came up to me to tell me what had gone down. And he told Prabhupada that, he said, Prabhupada, lately the brahmacharis are manifesting a lot of agitation. They're very disturbed, having difficulty maintaining their brahmachari mood. And we don't know what to do, how to deal with this. And Prabhupada said, well, if they're agitated, just get them out, tell them to get married. What's the problem? And Vishwakarma said, well, but Prabhupada, all the big devotees, the sannyasis, they tell them if they get married, they're going to be falling down. And Prabhupada said, how can you fall when you're already fallen? In other words, where do they think they're falling from, that they're so exalted? And he said, besides, the sannyasis are not the big devotees. A big devotee is somebody who's humble and sincere and serving Krishna. That's a big devotee, not a sannyasi. He said, I only give these guys sannyas because they keep bothering me. So just so they'll stop bothering me, I'd give them sannyas to get, to leave me alone.
The devotees thought that I should join the movement. They told me that Srila Prabhupada was going to be taking them to different places in India, and I should join them. And I explained that I have already made a decision that I'm never going to leave Vrindavan for my whole life. So they became very critical of me. They were calling me a Sahaja. They were calling me a smarta Brahmin. They were saying I was bogus. They were saying that Lord Chaitanya's movement is to preach. And I was thinking that they do not understand. These Western people, they do not understand what is Vrindavan. They even offered me to be Srila Prabhupada's personal servant, because they said that they were always getting sick in India, but I was very much accustomed to living in India. But I told them that, thank you very much for this wonderful offer, but I will serve Srila Prabhupada when he does something in Vrindavan. And they were very much criticizing me. In fact, they were harassing me. So one day, Srila Prabhupada gave a lecture in a garden. And as he was walking out from the lecture to his car, I had just arrived. And there was crowds of people between his car and where he spoke. And they were all just bowing down to him as he was walking by. So I was one of those people in the crowd. And I bowed down just as Srila Prabhupada was walking by me. And then I got up. And when I got up, Srila Prabhupada was stopped right in front of me. So I looked up at him. I was on my knees. And Srila Prabhupada had a very serious expression on his face. Very concerned. and he looked at me right in the eyes. And when he looked in my eyes, I could feel that he was looking right into my soul. I could actually feel my soul being touched by Srila Prabhupada's glance. I had never had a sensation like that in my entire life. And then Srila Prabhupada asked me, how long have you been living in Vrindavan? And I was thinking, oh no, all the devotees have been chastising me. Now Srila Prabhupada's going to chastise me. So very shy, I said, Srila Prabhupada, I've been here about 6 months. And Prabhupada just stood silently, just looking at me, penetrating me with his glance. It seemed like hours. Perhaps it was about 30 seconds. And then his face blossomed into the most beautiful, ecstatic smile. And he said to me, very nice. Vrindavan is the most wonderful place. And then he rubbed me on the head and he walked by. And I was thinking at that time that everyone was chastising me for being in Vrindavan. But Prabhupada knew just what I had to hear to become attached to him. At that time I knew I was wrong, and I was ready to go anywhere and do anything for him. Because I felt such a love, such an understanding, such a depth that he was willing to say whatever was required to encourage me to become more attached to him and more attached to devotional service.
One letter he wrote me, this is actually rather interesting, it was in the middle of 1972. And at that time, there was no plain clothes Sankirtan. Everything was straight out, saris, dhotis, tilak. Here we're from Hare Krishna, please read a book about Krishna. But he wrote me a letter and he said, make sure that you sell books by preaching, not by cheating. I was really taken aback by this. I said, what does he mean? And he says, cheating. What are we doing? Then I wrote and asked him, Srila Prabhupada, you mentioned sell books by preaching, not by cheating. What exactly do you mean? His reply was that if you act in consciousness that Krishna is the supreme proprietor, he is the only enjoyer, and he is the dearmost friend of all living beings, then you are never cheating. But if you act in any other consciousness, you are always cheating. So he didn't specifically address, the fact, you're lying or something on Sankirtan to collect money to give out a book. But, the way I took it is Krishna is within us. When we're on Sankirtan, we should be trying to please the super soul within us, who's within all the people we're selling the books to.
Prabhupada said, he asked me if we were distributing the books. You're distributing the books? Is that going well? I said, yes, Prabhupada. We're distributing a lot of books. And I gave him the figures, and they were impressive. And he said, you're distributing the books, but are you reading them too? I said, oh, yes, Prabhupada. Every day we have 4 classes. And then he smiled at me, like this big smile. It was almost like a surprise. And he said, oh, thank you very much. And I just was washed with an incredible feeling of satisfaction that I had, pleased him. And it was true, because we would have Nectar of Devotion one day and then Nectar of Instruction the other day. We'd alternate and then do Bhagavatam. And then at night we'd have Krishna book, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Bhagavad Gita. And I told him that, and he was very, very happy. And I just remember this big smile coming over his face. And he said, and the devotees, they're coming? And I said, well, not really. Maybe every 6 months a few people join. He said, that's all right. Manu Shanam Sahasreshu Kaschid Yatati Siddhaye. He said, out of thousands among men, maybe one is interested. And out of thousands of those, maybe one becomes a devotee. So, that's all right. Don't worry about it.
One day he was giving Srimad Bhagavatam class. And I remember he was saying that you are all distributing my books. But my question is, are you reading my books? He said, if you go up to someone and try to convince them to buy the books, what happens if that person asks you, do you read these books? What is it about? And you tell him, I don't read these books, I only sell these books. He said, how will you convince them? Unless you are convinced of the subject matter of these books by reading them carefully, how will you convince others to buy them? He was very strong, telling all the book distributors that they have to very carefully read his books.
At one time I had the idea, let's try and sell the books through the bookstores. And I went and had a advertisement produced for radio from the Krishna book, and invested some Lakshmi in radio advertising, and placed the Krishna books in all the bookstores in SanDiego County. And I wrote to Srila Prabhupada about that, and he wrote back, "This is very nice. Please let me know if this is successful, because if it's successful, we're prepared to spend millions and millions of dollars to advertise our books." And of course, I didn't have enough finances to do it the way it should have been done. But it was effective, at least in the fact that it put the books into all the stores, got them on display, and it had some, and of course some of them sold, but not enough in that time to justify the amount that we'd spent. But I think Srila Prabhupada liked the attempt to boldly do something. Someone told me, I heard this year that Srila Prabhupada once told them, he asked, "What is humility?" And Srila Prabhupada said, "Humility is to act boldly for Krishna." We get the idea that humility is to be very meek and quiet or submissive. But no, Prabhupada didn't say that. He said, be bold for Krishna.
After Srila Prabhupada left, it was announced that in August he would be coming to New Vrindavan for a special Bhagavad Dharma discourse, where he would be speaking on a mountain and discussing Srimad Bhagavatam. And also, he was going to celebrate Janmashtami and Vyas Puja in New Vrindavan. So they were recruiting people to help to prepare. So I was thinking that I will go to New Vrindavan to help prepare for Srila Prabhupada's arrival. Then I will go back to Vrindavan, India. So I went to New Vrindavan. And there was great enthusiasm to prepare everything for Prabhupada's coming. There was a house called Madhuban, and it was an old, beaten-up house, and they wanted to renovate it. So I was helping with the painting and renovations. The day before Srila Prabhupada was coming, actually it was at night, he was coming the next morning, they discovered that the toilet didn't work. So everyone wanted to take rest, and I was told to fix the toilet. I had never fixed a toilet in my life. I was just pushing things in the toilet. I don't know what I was doing, but I was just doing anything to try to get it to flush, because it wouldn't flush. Finally, I was up all night. Just when Srila Prabhupada was arriving, I pushed the lever, and it flushed. And I was thinking, Prabhupada's going to be so happy. He has a toilet that will flush. So then Srila Prabhupada came to the Madhuban house. And he went in, and I was just feeling so proud that I have made his toilet so it flushes. And when it was time for Srila Prabhupada to go to the toilet, the devotees led him and said, "This is a very nice toilet, it works very nicely." And Prabhupada took his little lota, and he went out into the field. And he responded to nature in the field. And then he took his bath in the field. And he said that I enjoy responding to nature in the nice fresh breezes in the grass. So the whole time Srila Prabhupada was there, he went out to the field to respond to nature every time. He never used the toilet. So I got a lesson. Srila Prabhupada was teaching me a lesson of detachment. We should be willing to give anything and everything to please our Guru, but we cannot be attached to the results.
There's a couple of incidents that I remember clearly. One was he had a lecture at the University of SanDiego. It's a Catholic school. And most of the persons attending were priests, nuns, bishops. I think there was a cardinal there. All the lay teachers of the Catholic Diocese of Southern California. There was a big crowd. My father also came. And we put Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasana on top of a desk. And we put a chair, and he climbed up the chair onto the desk, onto his Vyasa-san. It was in a sort of a big, lecture hall. And he began his lecture by quoting a Sanskrit sloka that I've never been able to find. And then he said, "This means you are what you eat. In this age, most people are eating hogs." I never forget, I was sitting on the floor at his feet, and I was, "Prabhupada, how can you say this?" I couldn't believe he would speak like this to this particular audience. I could understand if he was calling the hippies, drug addicts, or whatever hogs, but he was calling this highly so-called cultured, religious, scholarly audience. He just said, "You are all hogs." And I was totally dumbfounded. I looked at the faces of the other devotees. They were all dumbfounded too. Because if I had been speaking to this audience, it was the last thing I would have said. And of course, Srila Prabhupada, with having no ahamkara, on the absolute platform, he could say anything and get away with it. They probably would have come up and stoned me if I had said the same thing. I never forget that. I don't remember the rest of the lecture, and I've looked for it over and over again, and I've never been able to find it. I don't think it's in the archives, or if it is, it hasn't been put in legible condition yet. On another occasion during the same visit, we had been invited to one Indian man's home, and Srila Prabhupada went, and we had some prasadam. We ate there. I don't know if it was prasadam, but then Srila Prabhupada and this gentleman, whose name was Dr. Duvari, began a philosophical discussion. Dr. Duvari was presenting every variety of Western philosophy, atheist philosophy, and so forth, and Srila Prabhupada was countering him. The conversation began at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and it went on and on and on. It was finally about 11:30 at night, and it's still going on, and it was just three or four of us sitting there. We didn't say a word the whole time. We were just sitting, watching Srila Prabhupada and listening. And finally, Srila Prabhupada became exasperated with this man. He just said, "You're a fool. Mudha, such as you, I've never seen before. I've never met such a complete fool." And he started pounding him like this, because the man wouldn't submit. And then finally, Dr. Duvari laid down and put his head on Srila Prabhupada's feet, and he submitted. And since then, his entire family became Vaishnavas. They became, I was just in SanDiego, and their family and their family's family, they're still the biggest supporters of the SanDiego temple. We